apply the good things you've given us. In your name, Jesus Christ, amen. All right. So yeah, as always, this is a Sunday school. This is not a sermon, so you're expected to interrupt with questions, comments. Just raise a hand and away you go. But what got me thinking about sin, as though I needed an excuse to do so, was that in sin is and values are always very much in culture. And it seems to be a lot of debate on what's right and what's wrong. Both in our leaders and other things, we have, okay, this person did a wrong thing, but compared to the previous person, the previous administration, or the previous government, or the previous business, it's not that bad. So suddenly it becomes their mistake is no longer an issue because they're not as bad as the previous one. Sure. And we call this relative. Oh, it predates Hitler by quite a bit. Hitler himself used it. He wasn't as bad as the competing political parties in his country, and so he used it quite often. But you see, the issue is immediately, and I was never trained in debate, but in debate it's called plausible deniability, not plausible deniability, it's called red herring, where you just create another issue and you just completely sidetrack the argument against you. You just say, well, consider this person here, you no longer go along with me. And that's called relative sin. Excusable sin is where, yes, I know it was wrong, but it was for a greater good. You get anti-heroes in Hollywood that, what is right is not necessarily what's lawful. I may be breaking the law, but I serve this greater good. And so they wear black hats, black coats, a little bit of a stubble here, and they're the bad guys that are really inside good guys because they're acting for a higher cause. So we call that just excusable sin. And then there's the old shoot the messengers. I call this, well, we're not going to, please don't shoot the messenger. We're not going to do that one. But it's this idea that if you hear something bad about somebody, go after the person who told you. So we're not trustworthy. We're not going to bother debating whatever message you got because you're one of those people. We castigate the media, we castigate the church, we castigate prophets. Even Paul himself says, do not disrespect prophecies, which would be easy to do. But apparently, the church was having a problem at that time that somebody was spouting off something and immediately was, oh, you're just another one of those crazy prophets or that person. So you go after the messenger. And therefore, you don't even bother considering what they're saying. So this is how we're defining right and wrong. And pretty soon, I've heard this is said more than once, and that is if you do this enough, then pretty soon the public, the church, the group of people just becomes, well, they delegate. They said, this is too confusing. We're just going to delegate right and wrong to you guys. You guys figure out what you're doing, and then we'll figure out where we're going to follow you. And so you quit believing any messengers or any leaders. You just say, you hear the slogan, well, they're all crooks. And so, yeah. So you just quit listening to right and wrong. So then it becomes, well, what is sin? Really, sin is from the Greek, it means to miss the mark. But if you have a different mark, then you have a different sin. And when I was thinking about this, if you prioritize power, then what is a sin for you? If exercising power, using power for whatever reason, but if having power is your priority, then what's the sin?
Wait a second. We're supposed to do things that please God, so we're going on the world standard instead of what the Bible says right now.
Yes, but you aren't answering the question.
So we're not going to biblical standards
Hello?
to answer the question.
We're saying okay, go backwards one step. We have a problem as Christians. It's a minor problem, and that is we can't talk about right and wrong with non-Christians in a way that they think is credible, because we just say, well, because the Bible says so. And the person merely says, oh, well, I don't follow the Bible, therefore, Or the popular culture expression is, that works for you. And by saying that works for you, they're saying, well, that doesn't work for me, and therefore I'm not a sinner, because you have a different standard in right or wrong than I have. And so we're no longer able to talk to these people because we don't even have a common vocabulary of what sin is. So back to the original question, if you're a person that prizes power, then what is sin for you? What's the opposite of power?
Walking all over other people.
Is good. Walking all over other people is good because that's a display of power. So what's a sin for you? What's missing the mark? What's the opposite of power?
Weakness.
Weakness. So weakness becomes a sin.
Oh, shoot. Where is Terry? He can always answer these questions.
So, well, I hope you know the opposite of power is like weakness. And so
There's strength and weakness.
there is, but a display of weakness is sin. And we do this with our own kids. We say, quit being a baby. Quit crying. That's a display of weakness because we honor the stoic strength, display of strength. We criticize leaders. Oh, that leader changed their mind. That's a show of weakness. And we want certainty, so we want power. And so, if a person says, well, you're just weak, and as Christians, we say, well, that's not a bad, you say that like that's a bad thing. Being weak isn't bad for us, because we know that the person who was crucified on a cross ends up being the leader of heaven and earth.
Yeah.
But when you're talking to a person who prizes power, they say, I don't want to be a Christian because that's weak. Mm-hmm. I don't want to confess sins because that's weak. And I go through life not confessing weakness, and we go, how can you do something wrong and not confess your wrongness? And that's because weakness for them is a sin. Now let's say you have a different value system. Let's say you prioritize beauty. If beauty is your priority, then what's the weakness?
Ugliness.
Ugliness. Okay. And it becomes the same thing. And you think, well, nobody has that value system.
Oh, yes, they do.
And yes, they do. But think of how much billions of dollars they're spent on creams and salves and vitamins, and not by people who are going to necessarily live a year longer, but they want to look better doing it.
There's a song I hear occasionally, and it says, if you want a happy life, marry an ugly wife.
Well, I missed that mark. My wife is pretty good looking, but I would hate to be
You
the...
must be very unhappy then.
No, yeah, I'm woefully unhappy. Okay. But you can see there's a whole culture. And so their criticism of Christianity is, you guys are so plain, you're so unfashionable. And we go, is that a wrong thing? You know, the Bible castigates worshiping fashion and jewelry. Paul says, those who wear adornment and just monopolize that. And so we think that's a virtue. But to some people, living a plain life, a non-entertaining life, it's like all you Christians, you just go to church and you sit there being right. Whereas I'm beautiful, I'm cool. Okay? And so they don't want to listen to you because they have a different value system. Being sin is ugly. Oh gosh, my wife and I were laughing about this yesterday. When somebody says, you look tired, and you go, is that a compliment? Is there any conversation where that's a compliment? No? Then why are you telling me I look tired? Don't do that. You look like you've been sick. I don't know where people come off thinking that's a compliment. It's not.
Why does it have to be a compliment? It's a statement of fact. You
Yes,
are tired because you're
right.
working so many hours.
So I used to, my wife worked for a Chinese couple who ran a Chinese restaurant, obviously. And her greeting, she would size you up, and she was the friendliest gal. She would size you up and go, you put on weight, you're fat. It kind of killed the conversation. I mean, I should have a different value system, and I think, no, I'm well insulated. Okay, but so that was their value system. For her, that was not wrong.
Was that a compliment in the Chinese culture?
I don't know, but it was
In the old
at
days,
least it didn't.
In the old days it was.
It didn't have the bite for her. She
A lot of
felt.
cultures, a lot of cultures, if you're fat, you're rich.
I know.
That's
Yeah,
the old
I've heard that
too.
from Polynesian culture too. But and every once in a while, given California teen slang, that's fat or that's sick, and I mean that's cool. But the first time I heard that after a lecture, I go, "Excuse me," the kid just said, "That's sick." You kind of go, "What?" He goes, oh. He looks at my stunned face and goes, "Oh yeah, you're old. Sick means cool." You kind of go. So anyway, if that's your value system, then sin is being ugly. If you prioritize people's approval, like that's how you rate, that's how you're like, hey, I'm doing well or I'm cool because people have my approval, then what's the sin for you?
The bottom line, I think, of truly filthy rich people
Yeah.
is emptiness.
Surprisingly, they're not all empty. There's some that are actually pretty happy with life.
Oh, my sister's extremely healthy with, well, happy with life.
Yeah.
And I call her almost filthy rich,
And she's almost filthy rich.
or definitely filthy rich, one of the two, whatever you categorize her in.
I think when you're filthy rich, you should just take money out of the equation, right? You go on your life like you want to live instead of worry about
Right.
because you don't have to worry about money, which is a blessing that you don't have to.
But
So you can do whatever you want.
So that's happy rich as opposed to being filthy rich.
oddly, my
Yes.
dad, who didn't believe, I told you guys this story, who didn't believe there was a God, watched
Right.
Leslie, watched me, and says there has to be a God, because you have something
Yeah.
Leslie does not.
That's right. That's right. So people who have these priority systems, it's not like they can't see Christianity. In fact,
Dad was middle class,
Yeah.
and Dad worked, but he saw something missing, even though Leslie is filthy rich.
we in people getting people's approval, as teachers, we used to talk about what happens with girls when they go from grade school to junior high, high school, and they suddenly discover peer approval. And you'll get gals who they're top of the class, they're verbal, they're just hitting aces, they just do schoolwork naturally. And suddenly they're being stupid and loud and rude. And you kind of go, what's happening? And part of it is they suddenly figured out that culture doesn't approve bright girls. And in order to get approval, which suddenly became, not suddenly, but became important to them, they had to change their value system to do what was cool.
I wish Maya would have stayed for this, she would have had a lot of input, anyway.
Well, it's parts of all of us. We all, as a churches, figure out if a church is on the right track. One of the things you evaluate is, are you well attended? Do you have are you interrelating smoothly with society? Or are you creating opposition? So, we're conscious of peer approval. The opposite of peer approval is rejection. You're doing something that's uncool. You are no longer popular. You're alone.
Well, come back to the question, the guy who's stepping on toes, gets up on top,
Yeah.
doesn't have the conscience, serve conscience in many ways. How would you relate to him to bring him?
Oh, it gets, the sentiment I've seen more often is Christians that believe they're on the right track because they're insulting people. They wear insulting as a badge of honor. I've done this. Now people are persecuting me. I must be on the right track because now the world hates me. Or people who choose to live a life alone. And then they kind of wonder, well, maybe I'm on the wrong track because nobody else is here with me. I'm alone, now I feel lonely. Am I really on track with God because I'm all alone? So it becomes part of how you define, am I sinning or am I not? And I think evaluating it, yeah, go ahead.
But God says, be content. And so the Christians, as they're following God's path, they're content to be alone if the
That's right.
circumstances are there.
So
They're
that's
content with
a false system. is to think aloneness is either a sign you're on track or off track.
Yeah.
Either way, it can go either direction. I'm at, if you prioritize family.
But it would be
Yeah,
sort
go
of
ahead.
like if you're not willing to go to the bar and party, not willing to do all these kinds of things that are the in crowd
Mm-hmm.
does.
Yeah, I've,
Those
there's,
Christians, they just don't have any fun.
sounds like you guys are ready to move on the next sketch, but there's all sorts of examples.
Question about the rich guy who's stepping on the toes. How would you relate to him to make him see he needs Christ?
Oh, okay. Well, happily, Paul answers that question. So I don't even have to say, well, this is my opinion. Paul answers this question with the Romans and the Greeks. Mark is a scribe, and he's writing to the Roman church, but essentially the whole Roman and Greek world. And the Greeks love to debate. They love to debate wisdom. Is this right or is this right? If you were, they'd be the sort of people that said, if you were faced with this or this, what would you choose? And the Romans, a little more power and legislation, but they were very much admired the Greek system. So they very much got into this, well, sin is whatever you make it, right or wrong is whatever you make it. And so Paul starts off his letter in Romans 1 saying, well, here's how everybody from every walk of life can come up with God's system of right and wrong. So it's pretty exciting because we're kind of, in America, we have a whole bunch of cultures, and we want to value everybody's culture, and so that means we listen to their value of right and wrong as well. And then we start to have doubts of our own right and wrong. Are we really on the right path? Well, I believe in Jesus, but is what I'm doing with my life right or wrong? And we're supposed to be content, and yet we're told to examine yourself. Mm-hmm. Are you on the right path? So now I'm going on to that question. I'm giving you the runaround, but you're sticking right with me. So let's go to Romans. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I followed you already there. I'm thinking through.
Oh, good.
They know in their heart what is right or wrong is the answer. Here's what you're going to tell me.
Interestingly enough, that's not what Romans says. So, yay.
It's within their hearts.
Because the problem with what's in the heart is that it says that the heart is desperately wicked.
Oh, desperately wicked.
So let's go to, okay. So Romans 1 really helps if you have the old section headings, but I would actually direct you to Romans 1:18 for starting off. But just in general, the Roman road is such an awesome layout of the gospel.
Yes, it is.
Because he doesn't just start with, well, this is what it says in the Bible, friends, take it or leave it. But Paul really tries to start with all men. For the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what is known about God is plain to them, since God has made it plain to them. So I've been starting off with, hey, people have different ideas of sin, and it all comes down to, well, whatever works for you, and blah, blah, blah. But that's not what Romans 1:19 is saying. He's saying, what's plain for all men? So take the rich man that you were talking about. There is some point of contact, the base level in which we all kind of know what's right and wrong. Okay. It says, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature can be clearly seen, and being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. Oh, yeah. Just hand that back to Terry, right there. So my first answer to you is, it's actually creation itself. There's a common value system about what is right and what is wrong. It's a base system. So, if you could just think of, okay, what can you learn from creation? What would you say is one virtue? Okay, based on just the way we're made, doing this is throughout the world considered right.
Okay, he was saying, Terry, a person who climbs up the ladder, stepping on people's toes. What could you say about Sid to that person? She doesn't feel bad about stepping on people's toes to climb up the ladder. That's his system. Well, my sister doesn't believe there is a creator
Aha.
at all. So there you go.
So there you go. And there's also an answer to that. But there are values, because even a person who doesn't believe in a creator somehow has to account for their morals. How do you have morals if there's not a moral giver? How did you even come up with your deciding that murder is wrong?
People are pretty intelligent.
My sister told me.
Yeah.
Your sister's kind of strange like my sister. My sister told me. I said, well, what do you and Tom believe in? Because she's really down on religion, even though she was raised Catholic. She's
Right.
down on religion. So she said, well, we believe in a higher power, whoever that is. And
Yeah.
ooh, I just moved. I don't, that just seems, where did they get this idea? I don't, because I firmly believe in God. I've never doubted God. But
Amen.
she was down, my daughter had it out with her whenever she was saying, I'm not sure if I believe in God.
Yeah.
She was saying, what do you mean you don't believe in God? Yeah, that's really.
Preaching to such people is good, because maybe the Holy Spirit will allow them to hear some things, but they have some objections. Even the higher power people, you go, well, where do morals come from? Morals ubiquitous across the human race. Murder, fidelity, faithfulness, generally truthfulness, not stealing, okay? People lean on the particulars, but they have these general values, and nobody taught it to them. They knew. I mean, when my dog steals food off the top of the table, it doesn't just stand up there and say, hey, be proud of me. Look, I'm on top of the table. No, he immediately grabs the stuff, goes slinking off, knowing that he's done wrong. There are common values that are common across the human. And so for the higher power people, you go, well, where do you believe that morals come from? Any morals?
He would steal it and smile at you.
Well, okay. Beagles and rocks are about the same, except the beagles may be cuter. Okay, it's debatable. I've had a beagle. I can say that with some vehemence. Okay, so the part of creation that Paul's talking about is this, not only the way we're created, but this common set of values that is ubiquitous. And when you're talking to people who appear to be incredibly different, you'll find those values. How many of you have heard, there was an old missionary story from 30 years ago. It's called The Peace Child.
Yes.
How many have heard The Peace Child? But the starting dilemma of the story was this missionary went to a culture that believed that lying and murder and stealing were virtues. Mm-hmm. And so he was stuck. I mean, not just keeping himself alive, but he was stuck because all the ways in which you present a savior is you need to be saved. Why do I need to be saved? Because you're doing this. And they go, well, that's a virtue. And so he had just a point of connection with rich, powerful people. Is that their only value system, or is there a deeper value system that they're created with? Turns out that they are. Even the rich and most callous, they have an idea that there are things like fidelity, like you deal with people you trust in a certain way, and you hold to those rules. You don't violate them for your own benefit. You don't murder, okay? And if you do, anyway, how they excuse their behavior, but the reason that they even feel that they have to hide murders and lies and stuff like that is because they really in their heart believe that there's a common set of values, and you can appeal to that. Where do you believe this set of values come from? Morals come from a moral giver. Okay? And so that's what Paul is appealing to here. He doesn't even, the trouble with appealing with what you feel in your own heart There's that the immediate response is, well, I feel this is right, or I feel that is right, or that works for you and not for me. And so Paul doesn't appeal to the way your internal compass, and yet he does. Not how you feel. It's the internal compass of right and wrong. He says we're all created with it. So that, prostitutes, they excuse their behavior, but they have an internal compass so that makes them feel they have to excuse it. And so you can still have a point of connection. And sometimes in long-term hard cases, relatives, you just think, I'm not getting through this person. What we can go to is go to the real base values that we all see, and that's creation and what we're created with. And that's what Paul does. Paul takes it all the way back to creation and says, although they knew God, wait, some people say they don't know God. And yet, there's this sense that we're important, and our importance comes from a divine order, that people are over animals. So I've known some people that would say they're immoral, and you say, yet you believe that valuing people is overvaluing animals, is overvaluing vegetables, is overvaluing rocks. You have this, where did that even come from? Why do you value people? And you say, well, because I'm a person, so I value everybody that's like me.
I'm a person, I want to be valued.
Exactly. And so then, one of the great things about, well, that comes from God, is that you're teaching people to value themselves. We are created, and we're created, says in Genesis, that we are created to be like God. And that's with an internal compass, and that's with a sense that there is a God. Though you may try and cover him up, okay, there is a God. And if you don't believe that, what I call real, or what is it, the fancy English one? People who believe that reality is the only thing there is, okay? And you're talking to somebody like that and you say, we have no point of connection. They don't even believe in the supernatural. You go, well, do you believe in love? Do you believe in justice? Do you believe in faith? They'll invariably say yes. And you say, well, you can't see those. Do you believe in things that you can't see? Well, yes, there's a whole world of matter and energy and stuff like that they can't see, and yes, they believe it's there. See, so let's talk about God. So therefore, they knew God, they neither glorified him as God or gave thanks to him, but in their thinking, they became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Okay, so Paul walks this on, and it talks about the progression that once you start, and that's what I was doing here, was talking about how the world evaluates sin. Once you decide to discard God's values and just come up with your own compass, you continually have to kind of worship that, and then you go off into behaviors that kind of reveal your heart. But really what defines sin? Well, the Bible. Well, where does the Bible define sin? So I'm actually worked myself down. So we go to the Bible, and there's a security in that. It makes some discussions a lot easier. If somebody says, well, where does it say that in the Bible? And then you kind of go in the Bible and say, there. You're appealing to a higher source. So where in the Bible does it talk about sin?
All sin and fall short of the glory of God.
Very good. So all have sinned. And remember that sin is to miss the mark, so what's the mark? What?
Perfection.
Perfection. What defines perfection?
Christ.
Grace is actually extended. The funny thing about grace is actually grace is an allowance given to people who need it, those mistaken. So what's the standard of perfection? Where do we go to? Ten Commandments is a good place to start. I mean, and then why did God give the 10 Commandments? Because he was dealing with the people of Abraham. They believed they were the children of Abraham. They had a family fidelity and a tribe fidelity, but they really had trouble establishing what really is the standard. How can you say I'm a sin? What's the standard? So God was giving them commandments. And the cool thing about Israel is they failed him. it would be a horrible faith we'd have to adhere to if God gave with power and glory and thunder and the whole mountain and the tablets. If he gave the 10 Commandments and the Jews held to them, that'd be horrible for us. So the lovely thing about the Old Testament is the repeated failures, and that is where grace comes in. It's a grace system because we fail the standards.
Even the Jews couldn't do it.
Right. So,
And then he takes it beyond, and he says, yes, don't commit adultery, but even in your mind, if you lust after someone, you've committed adultery.
right.
So he takes that sin even deeper into man's
Right.
being.
What was the earliest sin?
Eating.
Eating. That's it. And boy, someone can identify with that. I mean, if only Eve had gone on a strict diet, no fruit from the tree of life. Okay, so then we go. So
Lusty.
it was the lust of the eyes and the pride of life. Okay, so did Eve sin? Did Eve have a sin nature before she did the formal law?
She had a free will.
She had free will. And you could argue that she wasn't when she was confronted with the tree of the good knowledge of good and
Her
evil.
husband stayed silent. That's a big sin.
As that was a big sin.
They always say that at least Eve was tempted. Adam was
Yeah.
just dumb.
He's probably there shaking his head. Yeah, go ahead, honey, go ahead.
Okay, let's just go acknowledge that right now. That the snake knew who to talk to, right? Okay, yeah, we're gonna ignore no.
But it's sin nature because Eve think that if she eat the fruit of wisdom and
Yeah.
whatever, she will be knowing things and knowing better than God.
Right.
It's the power trip, right? I mean,
Not better, but knowing.
We will be like God, knowing good from evil. And that was the temptation. So then she took a second look at the tree. So she stopped consulting God, and she looked to her own selfishness, and so the
Maybe
ability to sin
also,
was there.
However, her friend is God, and she would like to be able to think on his level, to communicate more
Right.
She
in a more
doubted him.
special way with God than like, he has these great thoughts, and I can't even really talk to him.
So we could call that
well, but
excusable sin.
I'd like to be able to.
Was she told not to eat from that tree?
right.
Well, what should have been was that she should have said, well, I'll think about that, and I'll talk to God tonight when I see him, and ask him what he thinks about that. Why don't they just wait a few hours until God, as usual habit, showed up?
God shows up.
Impatientness.
And
It's
they-
another
yeah,
sin, right?
yeah,
So the willingness was there, and what made it sin was that God drew a line.
yeah.
So if he hadn't have drawn that line, then would there have been sin? It's the old game of how can you miss the mark if there's no mark? And so
Well, then thank goodness that they were actually chased out, because otherwise that was grace. They were chased out.
there was a
Because
number of
others-
points of grace, not flattening them and
Yeah.
starting over.
Yeah.
But when we go through the Bible, we're looking at the record of a people given special treatment by God and failing repeatedly in every way imaginable, and yet God keeps taking them back and working with them. So we look at God's faithfulness to stick with a people, and that becomes the whole 1,800 years of God's faithfulness recorded here becomes the record that we now have as Christians when we fail. God's going to stick with us. He's
God,
faithful
we're
to
on
us.
1,800 years, so I guess I could feel a whole bunch more.
Yes. Yeah. And there's another argument. Now that we have God's grace, can we sin that grace may abound? And another part of Romans that's also dealt with right there.
But when you're dealing with people who don't want to hear from the Bible,
Right.
coming from a whole different angle.
Then you come from what do you consider good? Everybody has a view of good and bad. What do you consider good? Okay.
A big difference in Christendom
Yeah.
was the old days where there should be no mixed feelings, guys and gals in the swimming pool at the
Right.
same time. Don't go to the movies. Don't play cards,
Yes.
etc., etc., etc. The list was long, and
Yeah.
that was sin. All those things were
All those things were
sin.
sin. And so they like the Jews, they called, talk about the tradition of the elders, which is a hedge. You have what God considers sin, and then we're going to build a human hedge around that so you don't even get close to what God considers sin. And the same thing in 1950s America.
It was a hedge.
We have what we consider right and wrong, and then we're going to build a hedge around that, keep you from even getting close. And we won't even go there because it's a long, convoluted story.
Okay, they consider family good, they consider enjoying sports good, they enjoy beauty good, they enjoy nature.
Mm-hmm.
And they go on with a list of, say, 50 things. Take it from there.
Bling.
Okay.
Take it from there. What are you trying to do?
Therefore, you need to bring them to thinking about God.
Well, actually, we have two responses. One is the very common response is, I have nothing in common with these people. I'm going to live my life. They're going to live their life. And then when we die, God will sort things out. And so you now have a contented Christian life because you feel there's no point in contact. There's no way to even start a conversation with these people.
But we're called to go out and share the gospel. That is one of Jesus' last words. And not only that, we're called to make disciples, not just share the gospel.
We're actually called to do something before sharing the gospel.
Live it.
Loving them. And part of love is communication, and it's hard to love something where you have no point of connection, no point of contact. So you actually have to seek out, consider even in your own prayer life, when you're praying for them. I mean, why pray for somebody where you have nothing in common with them? They like praying for rocks. Okay, God minister rocks. Well, there's whatever. So there's loving people is making contact and communication, which is why God had to send Jesus. As I tell people, God couldn't love us and keep his hands off us. Because there is a subset of religion in general which just says, God's good, and he's going to let people just sort things out, heaven and hell, and he just lets people follow their own free will and sort themselves out. But love says you can't keep your hands off the thing that you love. You want to communicate with them. So the most precious thing we can do for God is communicate. And same thing with people. I mean, that if people come into church and say, well, I'm totally unlike you, we have no point of communication, and life gives you the opportunity to make contact again, you would start off with some point you had in common values. Do we have anything in common with these people? The rich and the powerful. The current political environment, each party is saying, we have nothing in common with those people. They're depraved and evil and crazy, and we may not be perfect, but we're on the right road. But we don't have any ability to communicate, whereas our noisy, rambunctious system is supposed to be based on people continuing to have to talk with each other. And we don't want that conversation to stop. We don't want them to quit debating. You want that debate. Same thing with Christianity. You want communication. I have a favorite brother-in-law of mine because I've made him my favorite. We are on opposite political spectrums, and decades ago, and we're talking decades ago when the Tea Party was just getting started. Okay, we took opposite points, and he would say, "I know you don't think the way I do, and let's have a political discussion." But his idea of a discussion was pretty soon, I don't even know what to say with you. The direction you're going is so different. So I said, God, I want to love this person. And so we found a common values in family. We both loved our values in families insanely. Gardening. He's a far better gardener than I am. Okay. Crafty, working with his hands. I knew that any time I asked him about the latest construction project he was working on, he'd immediately warm up. And every now and then, we talk about God, but we don't talk politics at all. And yet, polis means people. So when you talk about people, you're really talking about that anyway. So I love my brother-in-law insanely now because we found those points of contact, even though we seem to be very different. Same thing, the opposite extreme would be another cousin that said, you know what, you said something offensive to me, and now we're just going to quit communicating. To this day, we go to reunions, say, hey, how you doing? They turn their face the other way, and we're going nowhere because we have no communication. So, yeah. But I still see things in that cousin's life that are good, I would agree are good. And so in the future, when we get that point, we could still, we could start a communication. I would start not with the Bible, probably not even with God, but with about the things we consider we have in common, good, right and wrong. What do you consider beautiful? Sunsets, small puppies. I mean, this person.
I think that's what we
Yeah.
with most anybody you can talk about. Wow, hasn't God made this a beautiful day?
Yeah.
Boy, to enjoy the warmth.
Exactly.
And
I have a radio announcer. This is